Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our show. We have a very, very special guest today. As you all know, this show is all about talking about fear, and she also just launched a book that I also co authored with her. So, we're going to share some of that. So, welcome back, and we do have her name is Dinalynn Rosenbush. So, welcome. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much, Kohila. It's nice to be here. I'm quite honored to be on your show.
Thank you so much. So, you have been an educator and a speech language pathologist for 3 decades. So, tell me a little bit about how you got into that.
How I got into that. Oh, that's kind of
Mm,
funny. So, when I was in college, I just took classes that I enjoyed. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And then pretty soon I had taken so many in this particular field that the professor pulls me aside and says, Dina Lynn, you've nearly finished what you need to have this as a degree. Why don't you declare a major now?
mm,
And so that's actually how I got into it. It really was just that I really, really enjoyed the concepts and the ideas in how language expands, how the brain works, how we can navigate our relationships better when we understand how our minds work and how language interacts with our mind.
mhm.
Like we sometimes have ideas of what language means. We call it a connotation, what we think is meant by what somebody says, but
Yes,
it may or may not be what they mean.
yes.
And then, yeah, so that was a fascination. And
Mhm,
that's actually what led me into it is my enjoyment of brain study and the interaction of language.
mhm. And then you have worked with parents and kids for a
I
while?
have. I just want to comment. Nobody's ever asked me that question. That's kind of fun for me to reflect on.
Yeah.
So yeah, but yes, in the last years I've worked in a school system. And in the school system, of course, we have lots of kiddos that come in. It's estimated that about 10%, sometimes in some buildings more,
Mm,
of the kids have speech and language delays of some sort. And so then you've got parents fairly often afraid, what is going to happen to my child? What do I do with my child now? I can't understand them. Oh no, they're having temper tantrums. I don't know how to relate, all of those things. And
yes.
so then they come to me, and then I would do the evaluation and then give a diagnosis and write the treatment plan, execute the treatment, bring in the parents, work with the parents and kids. And then they say, oh, this is magic. And
Mm,
I say, well, not really. It's science. And then just teach the parents how they can follow through at home. And yeah, of the parents that were able to get time off and come in and work with me with their kids, those kiddos made lots and lots of improvement more quickly.
yes, yes. I
So I
was
do
part of
love
those.
working with parents. Hmm?
As a special educator, working in the classrooms, I was part of many of the plans that you probably created. People like
Right,
yourself.
right.
Yeah,
And you understand the system so well.
yeah.
And yeah, you know how parents come in and I too, when my kids were young, and you've got teens, if I remember right,
Yes,
don't
I
you?
do.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
And so there isn't an ending point where you stop being concerned. Oh, what about this child? We
Mm,
always want what is best for our kiddos. My kids are adults now, and now I've got grandkids coming up, and I find myself starting that process over like, oh, what about, but they're
mm,
doing great, and I'm
yes.
sure your kids are doing great too. And yeah, and really to know where to go for those resources too is just super huge.
Yeah. What would be your advice for a parent who just notice their child has some delay? Because that's a big shock to a parent, right? And they just find out. What would be your advice to them?
Well, I'll say a couple different things. First, for some parents, it's not a shock. Some
Mm,
parents it is. So let's talk about both of those.
okay.
So for the parents that it is a shock, there must have been something that brought them to the school.
Mm,
There must have been something that brought the concerns to me, because I'm not the first line of person that sees an issue. The classroom teacher and the teacher will talk to the parent, and you've got this process of time where there has been these conversations. All of that happens before they come to me.
mm,
So sometimes there's a shock about the label,
yes.
but yet most of the time when they get to me, it's not shock value anymore. But when I have preschool kids, it's more about the fear.
Yes.
And I think that so then we talk about the parents that aren't shocked. They've had this is more common that I have found in my practice anyway, that they have had this stewing concern over time, like, what's going on with my child? Is my
Mhm.
child doing what they're supposed to at this age? Am I doing everything I can do to help them? What do I do in my home to make my home better? Because we're having tantrums and meltdowns, and it's related to communication. And I know that, but I
Yeah.
can't seem to get them to speak better. So I don't know what they're saying to me. And then they're
Mm.
also giving instructions, and the instructions aren't followed. And so they're like, what don't they understand? Why don't they understand it? Are they being, am I being a bad parent? Sometimes parents say that to me.
Mm.
Otherwise, they say, are they bad kids? And,
Mm.
and, like, and of course, that isn't where we anchor. That's not the situation, either bad parent, bad kids. It really is about a skill set that we need to learn.
Yeah.
But when we think the thought, like, am I being bad as a parent, or is my child bad? And what usually parents mean when they say, is my child bad, is it usually means disobedient and resentful, or any of those kind of words. And so what it is learning the skill set to be able to look past that and to be
Yes.
able to communicate underneath all of that, because it isn't about being bad, but when we think that, we become afraid.
Yeah. We shut down too, right? The parents are shutting
Absolutely.
down.
Absolutely. And I see a lot of that, and I can't help but to think that it has a lot to do with, there was a time years back when parents would be able to parent with their parents, or they would parent with their aunts and uncles. The living spaces were so much closer together. Now we have TV helping us learn what is normal, and
Mhm.
that's not normal. The sitcoms are not normal life, but they're sit comedy, because they're poking fun at. But yet we tend to think that what we see often and experience often is normal, and so then we feel like we're doing it wrong, and that creates more fear in us too. And so when parents come to me, fairly often they are afraid of, what is it that's happening?
Mhm.
What is it that I can do? Where do I go, and can anybody help me?
Yeah. And also, probably you answer the question, have I done anything wrong?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when that, I'm glad you bring that up too, because when parents come in and they're worried that they've done something wrong,
Well,
they're really spooling in their own fears.
yeah.
And that's not what it's about. If you have done something wrong, which every one of us has done many hundreds of things wrong, um, the best thing to do is learn to make a good apology.
Yeah.
And kids are so resilient. They're so forgiving. They're so able to move from, here, I did this wrong, because they do things wrong every moment, don't they? Knocking
Yeah.
over blocks in their mind is still wrong. Like, oh, that's not what I
Yes.
meant. So it's equal category of whatever wrong we do. And so when we learn to be able to say, I didn't mean to do that to you, I'm sorry. How can
Mhm.
I help you make it better? Whatever it is. Whether you spill their juice on them and then get mad at them for spilling the juice, but like, whatever. There's so many things. We
Yes.
all do hundreds and hundreds of things wrong as parents. I know. I'm a parent too.
Yep. Me too. And it's as you said, it's stepping up and just apologizing, and we all make mistakes, and making mistake normal, right? And learning from it.
Exactly. I'm glad you brought that up too. You're a good interviewer, Kohila.
Oh,
I love
thank
this. And I
you.
saw this in other interviews, but this is fun to be on the other end of it. Um, yes, I just forgot what you said.
Mistakes. Yeah,
Oh,
I just made a mistake. It's a
yeah, to
learning point.
normalize. That's what I
Mm.
was going to say. To normalize the
Yes.
idea of, I've made a mistake
Yeah.
and now I correct it. It's not about my character. It's not about my value. It's not about who I am as an individual. It was in the category of, oops.
Yeah.
And if we can keep it there, like a lot of the things that we deal with, it can make a big difference in how your child sees themselves over time as well.
Yeah.
Because they're learning how to handle their own mistakes by how we handle our mistakes.
Yeah. That role modeling for sure. So I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you, does any parent come to you too late? Have you ever felt like they should have we all have always have the should, could, would.
Yeah.
Should have come earlier. Did they ever hold back?
Okay, so it's never too late.
Yes.
Okay, so that is always a thing. It's never too late.
Mm.
I will also add, the earlier you get involved, the easier the correction.
Mm.
So I don't want to should, could on anybody.
But
I've got plenty of that in my own head that I work on all of the time.
yeah.
And um, what it boils down to is that as we learn, we act on what we learn.
Yes.
You can't hold yourself accountable for that which you didn't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have this inkling, this voice in us that says, go do this or go do that, and we don't act on it. And I think that's where we shame ourselves more.
Mm.
And the reason we don't act, though, is because oftentimes we don't know what direction do we go for action. Or I hear this person say this and that person say that. Who do I believe? I really don't know for sure how to act on it. I need to work in order to make enough money to be able to pay for that service. I have these work hours and a broken leg and whatever it is, like
Yeah.
we have, and we can should and blame and shame on ourselves saying they're all excuses. But the fact is that it's also some real, like we are able to act. When we are able to act, we do.
Yes.
When we're
Absolutely.
not able to act for some reason, we don't. So it
Absolutely.
is never too late to get involved and do things. But it is easier to make correction when
Mm.
your child is younger.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. So you have done several different books. You're a best-selling author. Tell me a little bit about your other books, and then we'll go into the book that you and I are together.
Okay, so my little cup of tea here. My other books have been compilation books also, I've
Okay.
contributed to. And the majority has been where I have told my late stage Lyme disease story, which is
Okay.
entirely different from the language of play. But it is definitely part of what you're teaching on, which is fear to fearless.
Mm.
And it's this, like, I was bit by a tick and I got extremely ill, ended up quitting my job, becoming
Mm.
disabled, being in bed for many, many hours a day for most of 2 years.
Wow.
And it was like, I did not know. At one point, I thought, I am dying. What do
Mm.
I do now? I don't know that I'm going to survive this. And it really looked for sure like this is the way we're going. So I gathered my family and we wrote up my will and we said, what about, funerals? And, like we planned it because we were looking at that. That was
Yeah.
right here. And so then what I ended up doing was I thought, well, I can't change the fact that I was bit by this tick and that I have Lyme, but I can change whether or not I take all these antibiotics. And
Mm.
the antibiotics, every dose was making me feel terrible.
Mm.
And so I thought, if I'm going to die, I'm going to be a little more comfortable in the end. And with that mindset, I packed up all of those pills and I just tucked them behind the couch. And I didn't tell my family for a couple of days. But then I started to feel a little bit better. And then I ended up um, leaving Western medicine and integrative medicine and going to Eastern medicine.
Mm.
And you might know a fair amount about that. I don't know, with your Indian background.
Mm.
So I poured into Eastern medicine and slowly started to recover very well.
Wow.
And so that was my big fearless move in that book. And
Wow.
so, like the title of that chapter, it was Gift of the Universe Through Women That Lead. And it was done
Mm.
by Orlia Moore. And that one, I titled it, Just Because You Don't Understand Doesn't Mean It Isn't True.
Wow. Wow. I'm so
Yeah.
glad you're here, and you
I am
did the right
too.
thing of chugging those pills.
Yes. 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 And there was a
Sometimes,
lot of recovery to do. And yeah,
yeah,
that is a
our
whole
body,
nother big story. Hmm?
yeah, our body is very smart. It tells us, right? It
It does.
it really speaks to us, and we need to listen to it. Like even sometimes pills, right? Like we have to listen to it. If it's not working, our body will react, and it's talking
Mhm.
to us, and it
Right.
was talking to you.
You're absolutely right. And I think that was the beginning of me learning that my body speaks to me. I don't think I ever knew that up until that point. So, we talk about we act on what it is that we know. I
Yes.
had this intuition in me that, like, I don't want to take these things.
Yes.
But I didn't act on them because I believed that what the doctor said, like, he must know Lyme disease better than me.
Yeah, of course.
But I was
Mm.
pouring and pouring into a lot of books, reading and listening to audio, and then eventually what it really came down to was just what you said.
Yeah.
Your body, whatever it is that your body needs,
Yeah.
learn to listen to what it is that your body's saying. And the link between that and really parenting is that I believe beyond a shadow of a doubt that a mom's gut is the right choice 99% of the time. When a mom comes to me and they say, like, I don't know, that's fair. They don't know. But when they just feel like, these big decisions, like, I just feel like I need to homeschool, or I need to stop homeschooling, or
Or there's
I just
something wrong.
felt like I need something is wrong
Yeah.
and I don't know what it is. And so I'm starting with you,
Mm.
like, whatever it is, follow your gut. Absolutely, positively follow your gut, mamas, because I really believe that you you know your child better than anyone. And when you follow your gut, eventually you'll find the right answers. But it doesn't mean it's going to come right away.
No.
But you
Yeah.
will find the right answers if you keep listening to what your gut is saying. I think that God implanted that in every mom.
Yeah.
And 99% of the time, because we all make mistakes, mama's gut is right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that comparison at a point like that, what takes us off of our intuition and our gut feeling
Yeah,
is comparison. We start looking at
absolutely.
other children saying, oh, they're doing this, my child's not doing this, they why are they not doing this right at this stage, and then we have all these milestones we have to meet. So
Yeah,
those are the areas that I think we lose our intuition or our gut feeling,
absolutely.
because now
Hmm.
we're fear of my child being left behind or falling behind.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're also afraid of being wrong.
Yeah, that's true too. So
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
one of my
And
things is
I love that you do this show, because moving through, dealing with, just like manipulating the fear within us, like it's
yes,
Play Doh, as best as we can,
yes,
really brings us from that fear to being able to act, which is what I'm interpreting as fearless, is not fearless, really, but acting as if.
because fear
Because
is always there, right? It
it
will always
is.
be there.
It
It's like,
is. So even though I love the title Fear to Fearless, I think the reality is that we act in the presence of fear. We do the next thing with fear in our back pocket
it's just
rather
less.
than, yes,
It's just less.
it's
It's just
less.
less than before.
Yeah. I like to think of it as putting it in my back pocket instead of leading me like a map.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or blocking you,
Yes.
because
Yes.
fear just tends to just come and just shuts you down. But if you put it in the back pocket, like you said, take take a push from it.
Right. That's a
Push
great
you
way to say it.
forward.
Yeah.
Push you forward. Yeah.
So
So
easy
let's start.
said.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Trust me. I've come over a lot of fear myself. So that's why
Yeah.
I love this topic, is because of the fear that I had to come up with. Even speaking,
Hmm.
speaking on something like this would have been never happened before.
Right. And that's one of the things that I love about you, how transparent you've been with saying the way fear blocked you was it muted you. It
Oh,
kept you silent. And then finding your voice, becoming
mhm.
fearless, is this, isn't it? You are
Yes.
using your voice publicly from the polar opposite, which is being mute. And so I love that.
Thank
And I know that in speech therapy, a lot of people have come to me with the idea that their child is selectively mute.
you.
And when you whittle it down, it comes down to fear. It comes down to emotions and heart and what we think about and how it is that our brain is operating subconsciously and consciously to what we perceive as protect us.
Yes.
Mhm.
Absolutely, absolutely. Tell me a little bit about this new book we're together in, and what made you write that chapter, and what is it called?
Okay, so No Problem Parenting by Jackie Finneman, as a producer, is a book that is designed to help all parents that have kiddos that they're raising and they want to build more connection and confidence in their kiddos. So I
Mm,
love that concept, and what Jackie teaches and how she believes is like this beautiful. I don't know what to say. We're on the same track, in many ways,
mm,
and a lot of what we teach mirrors one another, but we talk about it differently because I talk about it from a speech pathology background. Now, I was a sponsor in the book because Jackie came to me saying, "Be in my book, Dina." Yeah, you remember that now. Okay. And she said, "Be in my book." And I said, "I just launched a podcast. I don't have the brain space, because it takes creative energy. And
mm,
there's like only so much, at least for me, there was like only so much in my creative bucket per day. And I was pouring all of it into how do I get over my fear of getting
mm.
onto the podcast and dealing with the tech and learning audio and learning, how I do all the different things. And that's still a growing learning thing for me. But so I said to her, I don't have the brain space to pull up a chapter out of me right now.
Mm,
And she says, then be a sponsor. I said, I would love to sponsor your book. And so I did. And so she gave me a spread, a 2-page spread or something like that in the book. And I'm delighted to be the book's sponsor. And I look forward to writing an actual chapter next time because I'm thinking that next time I will have the brain space. I'm not totally learning new things the way I was last time.
yeah. But if
You wrote a
you,
chapter.
yeah, but if you were to write a chapter, what would you title next time? What would you write
Oh,
about?
well, but I don't know what my title will be, but I know what would write about.
About, yeah.
And it would be about how we build connection because
Mm,
I believe that many times as parents, and this was true for me too, you hit a point where you are frustrated with your kids' behavior. I shouldn't say hit a point. I should say you repeatedly experience that you are frustrated with your child's behavior, and we think we know what they're thinking.
mm,
And what we look at in their behavior, we think something like, boy, if I behaved that way, I would be thinking X.
mm,
If I behaved that way, I would be feeling X. And when we get into our own brain space about their behavior, we parent totally separate from what's actually going on, and we're not connecting with them.
no,
So what I would write about is that basic idea, and then go into how to go into the mindset that is saying, I'm curious. Why are you doing that? Why is it
mm,
that you're beating your doll with the hammer? you
mm,
know, why is it that you're pulling the hair? Why is it that you're, like to get into that curiosity. Now, sometimes when parents ask why, they say it like a correction.
mm,
And when we teach our children that why is a correction, they learn it's not an authentic question. But I want that everybody can look at their child's behavior and step back from their own thoughts, from their own feelings, and get into a mental space of wonder and use language that is playful
mm,
and go try to visit what's going on. And you might find that when that hammer is hitting that doll, it's because, well, when he kicked the hammer, it bumped it, and the sound it made was hollow. And so he was hitting it because it was a different sound. And then he hits these other things, and he's listening to the sound difference between something hollow and something solid.
mm.
And there's nothing malicious there. But yet it looked malicious from the outside because if I did that, I would be feeling X. Or if
Yes.
I did that, I would be feeling or thinking, whatever. And
Or the society fed us that if somebody's doing that, like movies and other
yes,
things, by
yes.
by training, we're trained to say, "Oh, doll hit means this," right? So that's
Hmm.
also, we take our programming.
Exactly. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah.
That's so true. There's lots of different reasons. Maybe it's from childhood, maybe it's from the
Yeah.
media, maybe it's from, like that's where we get our thoughts.
Yeah,
But then
exactly.
when we throw those thoughts
Right.
onto our children, they learn to start thinking differently, and they learn to start hiding,
Yeah.
and they learn to be quiet, and they learn that what their thoughts are and their feelings aren't valid, and they learn to not trust themselves as much, which
Mm.
I don't want and you don't want. And none of us parents want that for our kids. And we do this kind of thing really inadvertently.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what I would write the chapter on. I haven't embellished it. I haven't written it. I haven't
Beautiful.
even spoken it before this moment. But it would be
Perfect.
something in that realm to help parents understand, like to give sentence starters and ways you can approach your kiddo so that it's a non threatening exploration of what is it that's going on in your mind right now.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
when we can get into their mind, so often it is just a delightful playground.
Yeah.
And there's such innocence there, even when it seems not innocent. Many, many times there is. And then when there isn't the innocence, then we know we have some heart issue to explore
Mm.
and ask them, you know, what made you think that? What happened with your friend at school? What did you see on TV?
Mm.
Like what's bothering you? Now I'm making those sentences up. I don't know that you would say those ones exactly, but to go dig into um, what might be in the child's mind.
Yeah. I think a lot of the time, I what I'm noticing is parents could really use conversation starters, right? Because it seems to be like, I was at the church on Sunday, and I was hearing this child, probably they're like 2 years old or three, maybe in that range, and they were making noise because obviously the church is boring for them. They're little, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the mom and dad were giving the phone to the child in the church, right? So even that, it's keeping them busy because it's so animated. It's
Yeah,
because of the phones being what it is. But I was wondering what else could they do at that moment, because the other people would have judged like, oh, look at them giving the phone. For me, like, how could we help that parent? Because even that, after a while, the child didn't want to do it anymore. They were making noise and they had to take them out,
sure.
right?
I do have a strategy for that. It doesn't happen best right in the setting.
Yeah.
It happens best when you pre-teach before you
Mm.
go into the setting. I read a book called Parenting in the Pew 20 some years ago, and it entirely changed how it is that I um, went to church with my kids, and how we went to a funeral, and how we
Mm.
went to the grocery store, all of those things. So, what, like I took that concept and I developed it into many areas.
Mm.
And the concept is tell your kids what it is that they're going to experience. Tell them we're going to get into the car and we're driving to this place. Show them the items that you're bringing along with you to help them be busy.
Mm.
Talk about what it is that they get to do. And then when you get there, before you get out of the car, you say, do you remember our conversation at home?
Mm.
Do you remember what you're going to play with? Have them say, yes, I've got the white paper and I've got 3 colors or whatever it is. And then you say, yes. And then what is our goal? But of course, this depends on the age. If you haven't talked what the word goal means, don't use goal, right? But
Yep.
the better way for littlest ones is, what does mommy want?
Mm.
And then they'll say, quiet, or something like that. You say, yes. And so then they'll sit down and maybe their feet are swinging really, really fast, but maybe that doesn't matter because it's not
Okay.
noisy.
Yeah.
Maybe they're kicking the pew in front of you, and maybe that does matter because it's not noise or because it's not quiet. So there will be a learning curve for your kiddo, and you'll learn what it is that your kiddo does or doesn't do. But yeah, I think it's better for our children, like you've alluded to, that electronics are certainly a convenience for parents, but it's not healthy for our kids. It's not great for our kids, but it works for a
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
What I ended up doing before, like there was like this was when I didn't have a smartphone or phone myself. And I just did what this book said, and then I embellished it. So when my children were 2, 3 years old, I got a small notebook each. I cut off a pair of jeans and made a bag out of the leg of one of a pair of pants. I got them a small blank page notebook. So there's no lines, no grid, just blank paper. And then they each could carry their own little bag, and it was their size. Their little notebook that was blank would be inside of it. And then they had chosen their 3 colors, and they were allowed to trade with their siblings if they did it quietly.
Mm.
And so, in order to explain quiet when they were 2 and 3, I would say, "Your lips stay shut."
Mm.
And so, what I would see them do is they go like this,
Mm.
and they'd poke each other, and then they'd look at each other, and then they'd offer the color, and then they'd say,
Perfect.
they'd and then they'd do the switching. And so they learned to problem solve and communicate in that. So there was some really cool learning. And then the other thing that I told them to do to try to get them engaged was that they could write anything that they hear.
Mm.
And this probably started about age 3, 4, 5, probably 3 to 4 is when I started this. Anything you hear is what you get to put on the page. Anything. And so, if there was something about rain, like REIGHN, on their page, it's going to be rain, like little dots of water, because they don't have multiple meaning word differences, like they don't tell them apart. But that doesn't matter. They were listening, and it's absolutely right if they draw raindrops.
Yeah.
And so many, many words would be like that, where I would see something and I'd have to ask, what is it? How does that relate to the sermon? And then what I would see on their pages was the words that were spoken, but an entirely different understanding. And it gave me a window into understanding how it is that the children learn and how the children understand. And that probably was the foundation. I've never thought of this. You asked some cool questions. That probably is the foundation for the Language of Play, which is my podcast,
Mm.
because that language, how it is that they understand, shows up in that kind of environment where they're listening, they're drawing what it is that they hear to their understanding, given their vocabulary. And many words mean many things in English,
Yeah.
but they knew 1 or 2 meanings of each word. That's it. And so
Yes.
they drew what they knew. And so it really helped me to be able to communicate differently with them when I would see exactly what they're understanding at the level they're
Yes.
understanding it.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
that is a fabulous thing, I would say, for any parent going into any setting that has a child that needs to sit still and you want them to be quiet. If they're 3 or older, challenge them with draw the picture of what you hear.
Mm.
And then give them permission when
Love
they're
it.
tired of doing that. They get to shut their eyes and lay their head on you and listen that way. But their job is to listen,
Yeah. And
not
that's
to
front
understand,
loading.
not to understand. Their job is
Yeah.
only to hear it, because when they go to these kind of things, it's talking way over their head.
Right. Yeah, it's too fast. And also I think what you said is so valuable, because this is it, like this is what I'm noticing with, even in my family too, even with the teenagers. It's the conversation that we are starting to lack, the connection and the
Mm,
conversations, because we're
yeah.
so busy. Everybody tends to be busy, and if we are together, we are sometimes diverted to our phone. So this is happening a lot. So as when we have little kids, 3 and 2 and 1, I think it's really important to establish that routine of this
Yes.
is our conversation time. And as you said, give them this front loaded conversation about how this environment is going to be and what are we expected in this environment, and then give them some task like listen. It's
Yes.
really good. And now every time, if that child is going to the church and if they learn that I'm going to be on my phone, now when the child is ready to even participate in the church or any activity, they're not going to want to, because they were trained to be on the phone, right?
Exactly. And whether we're talking about the church environment, or
Or
we're talking about
anything.
listening in a classroom, or we're talking about listening, at a speaker, a lecture, whatever,
Yes.
anything in that similar environment, we will have trained them right to um, detach.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
now they're going to throw a tantrum.
Yeah.
They're going to cry
Right.
because we just taught them that you can have this, and we're going to say, no, no, now you're old enough. You're not going to have that. Now listen. They
Right.
don't
But we
know
haven't
what that
trained them how
looks
to
like.
listen. Right.
Yeah, they don't know how to listen.
And listening is hard work. It is
Yeah.
not easy work.
No.
How many adults do we know that don't listen well? Right.
Yeah.
It is a skill. It is not something that is you're good at it or you're bad at it from the sense of character and value. It's a skill. Either you've invested in learning and becoming good at this skill, or you haven't yet.
Yes.
But you can learn that at any time. There's one thing that I forgot to mention that I particularly feel is super important, and that is celebration.
Yeah.
So when your kiddo does, let's just use this example because we've been using the church service as an example.
Yeah.
Let's say that the sermon is 30 minutes long, and you know that the sermon's going to be 30 minutes. Your child can get up and down and participate in music. They can get up and down, and they don't have to be quiet then. And they can watch people when there's offering. They can move around when there's a lot of the business kind of stuff going on of announcements or whatever. Have a time that their book time starts. So what I did with my kids, because 30 minutes is a long time for a kid to sit,
Yeah.
we don't want them to use up all their interest in the book prior to starting their quiet time in the
Yeah.
sermon. So have them get up and down in interest and pay attention to other people, and let them have a little bit of noise when it's appropriate, when it's okay. And then when it's listening time, to sit down. Okay, now is book time. And have them
Yes.
take out their blank pages and write what they listen or write what they hear. And then, and that's another thing. As they get old enough to learn to write, to take notes, writing words for what they hear, it's like when they're little, they make pictures for what they hear.
Pictures. Yeah. Draw
When they're in the middle, they're doing pictures and words.
words.
And when they're later, they're writing more words and less pictures.
Yeah.
Now, the celebration piece is that they do any of it, and what they do is worth celebrating. And when they start, the celebration is that they did it for 5 minutes.
Yes.
And that is okay. And then maybe you're going to pick them up, take them out, and you're going to let them go to the nursery or whatever you want to do. This is a training ground, and it takes years and weeks and months and practice. It takes practice. And so when you take them out, you let them know they did so good for 5 minutes. That was exactly what you want.
Yes. Absolutely. That is being patient, right?
Yeah.
Patient with your child, and it's a process. It's a process and a journey. Then enjoy it along the way, and
Mm-hmm.
you will get there. Yeah, the phone thing is a big issue for when we hand it to a child that's young, that's 3 and 2, because we're
It
not
is.
teaching them to be bored, and that's another thing we can touch on: teaching our kids to be bored.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that's a big topic too. When our children are bored, what I did was I taught my kids like when they were little, and I know this isn't totally accurate, but at the same time, our children only grab onto so much at a time. And if a word has many, many meanings and many ways to apply it, here's something that works when kids are small. And it worked right up until about the teen years for my kids. I taught them boredom is an attitude.
Mm.
It's not actually an attitude because it's also a physiological feeling of I don't want to. And a lot of times when I don't want to, it's because I'm tired.
Mhm.
It's because I'm hungry. It's because I'm overwhelmed, or just like I don't want to do the things that there are to do. When we're bored and say we have nothing to do, that is where I anchored into that's an attitude, because it's not that there is nothing to do.
Mhm.
The truth is, you don't feel like doing the optional things that there are to do.
Mhm.
And so we all get like that sometimes, where we just don't want to do the things that there are to do. Like I can always vacuum my floor, clean my windows, whatever it is. There's always something I can do and need to do. So it's not that we have nothing to do. But
Mhm.
when we are of an attitude, I'm bored, I'm not going to, then we can be frustrated and behavior can get out of line for our kiddos. If we teach them that there are things to do, but the truth is you don't feel like doing what you want to do, or you don't, let me rephrase, you don't feel like doing the things that there are to do. That helps them to kind of shift a little bit. And then you can say, okay, so now that's kind of your attitude right now today. That's where you're at. You don't get to be mean to somebody because of it.
Mm.
You don't get to be noisy and ornery because of it. What do we need to do?
Mm.
And then there's a second half of that, which is sometimes we still need to do what we don't want to do, even when we don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's going to be, like, and that's some days I didn't want to get up in the morning, go to work. I wanted to sleep all day. I mean,
Yeah.
there's going to be a day. And then you find out later, oh, the next day, I was getting sick, like whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's the same thing for our kids. The next day, we sometimes find out what's going on. And for me, it's been repeated that when I'm overtired, I don't actually feel overtired. I feel kind of ornery, bored, grumpy.
Mm.
And so when our kids are kind of ornery, bored, and grumpy, we can consider our thoughts, but don't necessarily take our thoughts and say that's true for them. But we can consider it,
Mm.
but then go in and explore. You might want to go down the route of what do you want to do? But sometimes when kids are in this zone mentally, they don't know. They just say nothing. And that's
Mm.
probably true. Or they
Yeah.
say TV because it's kind of a nothingness.
Mm.
Yeah. So teaching kiddos to be able to handle those feelings inside of them, to listen to their body, to read it as, is it an attitude I need to change? Or is it just I need rest?
Yes.
Like what's going on? Do I need good food? Did I have too much sugar yesterday?
Yeah.
Like we can help problem solve some of those things. Either, no matter the answer, you still have to deal with what is, and that's this feeling that they have. So to teach boredom as something that we behave in spite of is hard, but it's important.
Yeah.
Because you will get up some days, and even though you love doing this, there are going to be days you don't even want to get on your computer.
Yes.
And
I had those.
yeah, of course we do. We all do. So it's not like it's this day's experience for your child. It is a lifelong experience.
Yeah.
So let's teach them how to read their bodies, read their feelings, read their, to hear themselves, and then be in it,
Yes.
not just escape it. Like TV is an escape from your feelings, but to
Or
be in it.
numb it, right? Or numb it.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah. It's not working through it. We're not helping them. So that's where the communication comes in, right? We have to communicate with our children to know and talk about boredom.
absolutely.
Have a
Yeah,
conversation. Where
yeah.
is it coming from? Why is it coming? And what can I do? Or what can you do to change this? Or what do you need at this point?
That's a great sentence starter. What do
Yeah.
you need to feel better?
Yeah.
And if you ask your kiddo, what do you need? I'm going to write that one down because
Mm-hmm.
um,
It's a good one.
there. It is a good one. And it is one that I have had so much success with is at any age,
Yeah.
even with adults.
Oh, yeah.
When you see
Mhm.
somebody, so like I have a rental and somebody came in and they were crying and I
Mm.
don't know them. And I just stopped and I said, what do you need right now?
Mhm.
And they just said, I need some water and I need to lay down. I said,
Mm.
we can do that.
Mhm.
Like most of the time, I love that question because when you ask your kiddos, it causes them to have to go inside themselves to
Yeah.
look at what is it that's generating this boredom feeling.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
also allows you to not to say like get over it, because a lot of the time as parents we're like, we see a child, we tend to say, what's wrong with you? Just get over it, you're always like this. We instead, what do you
Mhm.
need, is a shock to the child. It's like, you're not going to tell me to do something, you're going to ask me what I need.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're really going to ask me and give me what I need? Okay, cool. The
Yeah.
little ones, if they're tricking you, right? So
Yeah.
you actually throw them off. Oh,
Yeah.
look, she's actually asking me something I wasn't expecting.
Yeah. And sometimes that is like you're fixed.
Yeah, yeah,
Sometimes that's it.
absolutely.
Because sometimes, and everything that I say, I'm using that word sometimes because children are people, which means
Yes,
nothing is
changing.
always.
Yes, ever changing. It's something that worked before doesn't work next time too.
Right, right. But to ask, and then, there's that shock value. And sometimes they ask for something that you can't give, like, let's go to Disney World. And
Mm.
you're like, we can't do that today. Yeah, you know, I live 17 hours by flight, like whatever it is. And,
Then
you
you
know,
can ask, why do you want to go there?
yes,
What's happening there? What's making you want to go there? That's why I
yeah,
love conversation, and that's what one thing that I'm noticing with a lot of parents and families is starting to miss is the quality conversations.
yes.
This back and forth. It's just so important because you can solve a lot of problems when you really have meaningful conversations.
Let me throw out something to you that might surprise you. I've lessened my use of the word conversation
Mm.
because I've been finding lately that there's been many parents that don't really know what is meant by
Yeah,
conversation with
conversation.
their child. They think I spoke to them and I
Mm-mm.
spoke at them, so therefore we conversed. I
Mm.
said, "Get your socks on." We conversed. And so it's amazing. Like
So what do you
there's a
replace it
need,
with? What do you replace it with?
words like you're saying, like ask, like,
Mm.
"Hey, we're going to go out today and I'm wearing my socks. Do you think you should wear yours too?"
Mm.
It just so that there's back and forth, because the term conversation goes with reciprocity. Reciprocity means you go back and forth and back and
Mhm.
forth and back and forth. And you have to go back and forth or it's not a conversation.
Mm.
You and I are going back and forth. And then I'm in a monologue for a little while, but then I go back and forth, back and forth. So conversation is different from spitting directions. It's
Yes.
different from me just talking at.
Mm.
Hmm.
Yeah, you have to hear a child's voice. They have
Yes.
to share their feelings, opinions, and you have to give space.
Right. And then you mirror back what the child says to the child. And mirroring, as you know, would be to speak the child's words back to the child.
Mm. Mm.
And then when they hear their words coming from you, they feel seen, they feel heard. And also, it gives them an opportunity to change what it is that they're saying, because then they realize, oh, that's not what I meant.
Mm.
And then they try it again. So then you say back to them again what they said. And then you get each time a little closer and closer to what it is that they actually mean.
Mm.
It's like if you think of this parenting process as a practice, and we're whittling away to find out where that child's thoughts are, and in the middle of this piece of wood is a horse or it's a bear or it's a cat, but we're whittling away a little bit with each conversation to figure out what is it that the child is meaning in this context. And then
Yes.
finally you understand it because it's revealed.
Mm.
It was there the whole time, but you have to reveal, and it's a puzzle, and we're playfully using language to go in, to be able to ask questions, to have conversation back and forth, to be able to figure out what is it that they mean, what do they actually need, what do they actually want. Now what they want is going to be limited by what their experiences are, so they, if you haven't given them many experiences, or they're young so they haven't had many experiences, their wants are going to only line up with what they know.
Yes.
They're not going to want that which they haven't ever experienced.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, this conversation piece is so huge. And I
How
think that
to how to have a conversation
how
is.
to have our conversation is a particularly new struggle among um, this generation of people that grew up with texting.
Mm.
It's like there's telegraphic speech sometimes between younger people, even in the verbal conversation. So
Yes.
learning to have a conversation is a skill, and yet we expect our parents that don't have really good skills to teach their children these skills.
Yeah. And imagine the kids who are growing up, they're in their 30s or they're in the 25 range right now,
Mhm.
who are growing up with text messages and stuff, becoming parents. They
Yeah.
really need to be taught how to have these
Mhm.
type of conversations
Yeah,
because it's not in their they never grew up with it probably,
right.
right? So
I
we're
would
like,
say, yeah, I would say the 25 to 35 age range for right now,
yeah,
as we're doing our recording,
yes,
um, is the group of people that I see. Many of them, they're struggling to communicate well without technology.
yes, yes. And
So yeah, yeah,
yeah, there's a whole training on how to do it with it and without it, and the benefits
yeah,
of doing without it. It's still very, very huge, right? The benefit of doing without the technology, because we're still connected people. we're
right,
we're not we can't detach.
right.
We can
And
just,
then there's that idea of going back to books.
yeah,
Get into the three-dimensional world again
yeah,
and really engage in the three-dimensional world, the trees, the plants and animals outside,
yeah,
the books you have inside, the toys that are inside, the game
yeah,
boards, some of the old-fashioned things. It's three-dimensional. And to make sure that our kiddos do engage in that three-dimensional world is so important for their eyes to develop flexibility, for their hands to develop dexterity, for their bodies to be healthy and strong.
yes, yes,
And then when we're in that three-dimensional world and we interact there, our conversation is different and the language we can use is more exploratory.
yeah. Love it, love it. We can talk for hours and
We
hours, you and I.
could.
We can go on for hours. But I want to wrap up with all the fears. Like I said, can you tell me one fear? But you said, you had many. So I wanted to talk about those a little bit before we go. Is that you raised your kids as a single parent, which is a
Mhm.
big, big fear, right? That we can talk on another show
Yes.
or shows.
Yes.
I've done it too, and yeah, it brings on its own fear of so
Yeah.
many different parts. So you've gone through that, and you started a business and a podcast. Tell us a little bit about your podcast for our audience.
I will say that that's the most recent big fear. And it was like I wanted to be able to talk about this concept that I have. And I've talked about it through this show. And I wanted specifically to be able to help parents whose children are speech and language delayed.
Mm,
And, like in the nation, in the United States, we are very short staffed for speech therapists.
yeah, here too.
Given that, our greatest resource has always been and will always continue to be moms and dads.
Mm,
So let's empower our moms and dads to have the skills. Obviously, if you have a bigger diagnosis or you have, like a harder one, you're going to need a speech therapist at times. There are things that you're going to need. But if you can do a lot of it at home and you can follow through at home with the practice, then kids do so much better.
yeah,
And they get over, a lot of issues can be just gotten over. Like, sometimes with some disabilities, it's a lifelong thing.
yeah,
Speech and language delay is not like that in all cases.
mm,
In the majority of cases, in fact, you can learn through it. So I think empower parents to do it. So
yes,
that's kind of a big thing.
yes,
Then when I was doing that in the school setting and I had parents come in, one of the really common things that I experienced was that um, the parents that came to see me fairly often didn't have these conversational skills, just like you and I are talking.
mm,
And we started with like parenting, basic parenting. How is it you converse with your child? How do we get our children to connect with us in a way that they want to interact? How can we correct them with them feeling like we're on their team?
mm,
Like we celebrate their growth. Because when a child is speech and language delayed, what you're correcting and asking is really hard for the child. It's not like you're asking them to do something simple.
mm,
It's you're asking them to do something that is actually very hard for them.
yes,
So, how do we build that trust? How do we build that parent child belief between each other that I'm going to lead you and help you to do this thing that you find hard, and
mm,
and we're going to do it together, and I'll never get mad at you for mispronouncing or saying it wrong, but rather we're going to work together to figure out the right way to say, whether it's
Mhm.
speech or whether it's broadened language. So that part was a big part of the beginning of teaching parents before they can actually teach their own kids.
Mhm. So that's all part of the podcast now. You're
Yeah,
giving
exactly.
actionable steps, and you also said how to start these sentences,
Yeah.
which are powerful. Daily doses. Is it a
Yeah.
weekly show?
By twice weekly.
Okay, right.
So the language of play talks about communication
Mm-hmm.
and connection strategies for our kiddos.
Mm-hmm.
And it's heavily for kiddos that have speech and language delay, but it's also for all parents because it's really the anchoring point to start is the connection. How do we teach communication? So yeah, it's both, and it's all. And so dual language I know is something for you, and that is also a piece of it. So it's all things language. It's dual language delay, and it's typical language development, communication development. And so
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I've got
So,
75 episodes so far.
oh wow! So you got over your fear of launching it and making it a success.
I did, yes, and it's in the top 2% of global ranking right now in the categories both
That's
of
amazing.
parenting and kids and family. So I know
Mhm.
that it's being helpful. So that's like really cool too. And yeah, I'm really enjoying the feedback I'm getting too. Like I feel like it's making a difference, and that certainly is what I was hoping. And so then I take coaching clients from there, and that also is like, oh, how do I do that? So all the fears of like writing a program that is my own, and the fear of like, how do I do business? And like, there's so many things, but it's been
Yes.
good to tackle that fear. And
You put the fear in your back pocket.
yes, the fear's in my back pocket, and here I am, and I'm doing it, and it's been great. I meet the coolest parents, and I have gotten to know just wonderful,
Nice.
wonderful parents. Because of course, anybody that's actually listening to my show, they're good parents. They
Yes.
wouldn't be listening if they didn't care about their kiddo and their language development and how they can connect better.
And they're concerned. And
Yeah,
you're helping them. That's awesome.
yes, and the people that communicate with me, they're all fabulous. Obviously,
Yeah.
they are caring, they are the people that I love to work with. And so, yeah, that's what I'm
Yes.
doing now, which is a big career change, which was also a fear. How do I change my career? So, yeah,
Mm.
but it's
But
been
you're
good.
doing what you love
I
still. Like, you
am.
didn't really change your career. Like you're doing it in a more powerful, a lot of the time, when I was a teacher and a teacher assistant and a special education teacher, I noticed that when it's a speech pathologist, they come, they give instructions, they leave, but there's always like there's no connection between the parent. Like there's no time, because as you
Right.
said, there's so much shortage. Your time is so special. You come in, you give it, and you go, and then we are supposed to implement it. So there's always a gap. So now you being on this show, they're really getting to ask more questions
Yes.
and dive deeper, and that's really good. So you are serving them in way more powerful way than you
Thank
were.
you. Yes, I want to fill that gap. That
Yes.
gap is exactly the driving force of this. A child comes to my room, I see them, let them go. I go into the special ed room, I see everybody, I leave.
Yeah.
And people are left floundering, wondering, how do I fill in the difference? And when the caseloads get high, it's like student, 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 student.
Yeah.
And I didn't like that that I would leave gaps. And so that is a big part. So thank you for
Yeah.
bringing that up too.
Yeah. That's your podcast. So
It is my
I'm gonna
podcast. Exactly.
put that podcast link, if you send me, into our show note as well, so the
Send it.
parents can follow.
Good.
And then the last question I have is, what would you tell your younger self about fear?
I knew you were going to ask me that. Um, and I know the answer. I thought of fear when I was younger as like climbing high in a tree, that type of physical fear only. I had no idea until I was an adult that fears within me in relationships are just as valid.
Mhm.
And to realize that you don't need to be afraid of people's thoughts because I'm not responsible for them. You
Yeah.
don't have to be afraid. At first, even to realize that that is a fear, I thought it was a way of being,
Mhm.
but it is a fear that you can and should. let go of, because it shouldn't boss you around. So the recognition of, I would say to myself that relationship fears are probably more important than any other kind of fear, and you need to learn to live with them. Because I didn't learn that. I didn't even have a clue that it existed until I was an adult.
Mm-hmm. And do you also notice how many stories we create to
Yes.
cover up our fear?
I'm still uncovering stories from when I was 5 years old. I don't know when that's gonna stop, but yes, I'm doing and currently doing some,
Work.
deep dive search in myself, and I have been really quite extensively for probably 8, 10 years now.
Yeah.
And if I was to talk to my younger self, I would say, "Start now. You're 10 years old. Start now."
Yeah. And
You
that's the
know?
thing with the parents that are listening right now, right? Like, whatever we're not, as you said, having that communication, conversation with them, they are creating stories.
Mhm.
If you leave them alone, like, I created a story that no one wants to talk to me, so I'll better mute myself. I don't want them to laugh at me, so I mute myself. And that's how I muted myself for so many years.
Mhm.
But nobody told me that.
Right.
Nobody did.
Right. The awareness, and for me too, with a lot of the relational things, and I had a lot of "be quiet, nobody wants to listen to you," a lot of those stories too, which is one of the bigger fears to give up also to do a podcast.
Mm,
Um, yeah, those stories that we develop when we're children
yeah.
that we think are accurate based on the limited understanding of the world we have at the time, don't help us a bit in adulthood, because now we have greater understanding. And to recognize what those stories are so that you can change them
Yeah.
is really important. And as parents, well, as I started doing this, I started playing with these concepts with students that were young. And what I
Mm,
found was that even as early as 3 to 5 years old, you can help a child create a different story and live
yes.
into it.
Yes.
Like, just create the story for them.
Mm,
You are able to do math. You are good at math. You just haven't learned it yet.
mhm.
And then they embrace that. They will put the effort in and they will learn math and they will be good at math and they won't be afraid of it anymore, whatever it is.
Yes, absolutely.
So, yeah, I wish somebody had done that for me when I was a kid too.
Yeah, but that's the thing, we're bringing awareness to parents, right? The parents who are
Mhm.
listening. You can do it. It's in your hands. You don't need anything else. It's just the constant being aware, being present, and taking those moments when they're creating those stories to, give them this guidance to create the right or the correct story that's going to empower them instead of
Right.
becoming hostage of those stories. Because I was a hostage of all my stories
Mhm.
and I created it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that takes that language. Like when we talk about the language of play, I think of play as being the curiosity, exploration,
Yeah,
experiment, go discover.
yeah,
Those kind of words are play,
play.
even for adults.
Hmm.
When we go outside and we do something new, when we try something we have never done before, all of it is play, in the zone of play in our mind. And when we go to our child and they're behaving however they're behaving, and we ask them a question, we converse, we
Mm-hmm.
try to get into what it is that's going on in their mind, then we can change that story for them. We can begin to pour into them what the truth is.
Yes.
And there's always a negative truth and a positive truth. And we don't want to teach them that negative truth. We want to teach them the positive, because what we teach our children to believe, they will live into. And if we keep telling them the negative side, they will continue to do that negative side because it's what they know.
Mm.
If we tell them the positive side of the truth, they will do that. They will live into that. And they will repeat that because, one, they want to please their parents. And two, it's what you're filling their mind with. And we will live into what it is that we fill our mind with.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's the language we want. That's the communication. That's the play. That is the anchoring point also for the language of play.
Awesome. Thank you so, so much. This was an amazing conversation. I only have 30 minutes, but I think we went over an hour. But so what? We've given them so much valuable information that is so important that parents need it at this time of,
Good.
in their life. So that's great. So tell me, what is the name of your podcast again? Play
The language of play.
Language of Play. And then they can listen on, it's on
Everything. It's
everything.
on everything. Yes. And I generally send people to the Apple website, but
Okay.
that's, so I'll leave that link in here.
Yes,
And
please.
yes.
Yes.
And yeah. So any player, though, that you typically listen to your podcasts on are there. And then from that podcast, people can find me because I have links, I have, whatever else.
Yes, awesome. Thank you
Yeah.
so, so much for being here. And thank you, all of you, for tuning in and staying with us. I know this has been a longer, but you guys got lots of tips from, a speech pathologist at in this show. So thank you so much. And we will go live again at 11 a.m. Pacific time on Wednesdays. Actually, these are not live again, but I will be releasing them on Wednesdays at 11 a.m. And if you're interested in making learning easy for your child, please book a call with one of our certified learning success coaches at learningsuccessacademy.com. Until next time, see what's on the other side of your fear and put that fear in your back pocket and keep moving forward. Thank you so, so much for
Thank you,
being here.
Kohila.
Yes.